We wait a couple of minutes or get started? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I see people are joining from the waiting room, so we'll make sure we get everybody in here who's waiting at that Zoom back door. Right, it looks like the numbers are starting to stabilize. So welcome to the weekly webinar, everybody. I'm going to hand things over to our guest of honor. We are joined today by Dr. Suma Babu from Massachusetts General Hospital to give a quick update about expanded access. So without further ado, Suma, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Suma Babu. I'm an ALS neurologist at Mass General Hospital. I'm a physician investigator. I wear many hats on any given day. I see patients and do clinical trials, expanded access protocols, and also run neuroimaging biomarker studies for ALS. So today I'm very excited to talk about expanded access protocols, and one particular expanded access protocol, the multi-site Trehalose intravenous infusion expanded access protocol. So we can move to the next slide. I'm going to spend some time on this slide. There is some history and how things have kind of evolved, leading to where we are today and an exciting new front that we are treading right now. Expanded access protocols, many of you may know what these are, and some of you may be new to this concept. So they're loosely sometimes also called as compassionate use protocols or compassionate use programs. Traditionally, expanded access protocols have been different from the traditional clinical trial in that there's no placebo-controlled portion, and it is mainly for the purpose of providing access to experimental medications for patients who otherwise do not qualify for traditional clinical trials. But the definition of expanded access protocols is slowly starting to evolve. And now we're starting to think about expanded access protocols also as potentially a way to conduct research and gather real-world data. It could be safety data. It could be also some amount of efficacy data as well. And this is an evolving concept in ALS. But it is not a new concept to the field of medicine. Oncology has been running expanded access protocols or compassionate use protocols for decades now. And so it is a new front for us. Now, in ALS, as many of the companies that are developing therapeutics for ALS often tend to be small biotech companies. And oftentimes, small biotech companies or small businesses, they run into financial constraints in terms of gathering enough capital to not only run the clinical trial, but then also having to think about either open label extensions or even setting aside a good number of slots for expanded access protocols to develop drug, manufacture drug, and provide access to that. So this is a constraint with many of the small biotech companies. And what that leads into is a demand-supply mismatch. Many patients who are not eligible for traditional clinical trials may not have the opportunities to get into expanded access protocols by default because there are only a number of slots that are set aside for EAPs from some companies who are in late stage therapeutic development. So in December 2021, thanks to this very strong advocacy efforts from the ALS community, especially the patient ALS community, the Act for ALS was passed into law. And what this brought to the field of ALS is really amazing opportunities for small businesses, small biotech companies who are wanting to set aside some, manufacture extra drug and set aside some slots for expanded access protocols for patients, and also conduct research so we can actually gather data, safety data, real-world data in patient population who otherwise would not qualify for clinical trials. And so the very first grant that was funded through the Act for ALS through NIH was the Trehalose multi-site expanded access protocol. And Mass General Hospital is really honored to receive that first NIH U01 grant that was funded under this law. We partnered with Trehalose Therapeutics, that's a small business, US-based small business, and they have an ongoing phase 2 trial in the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. That's the regimen E of the platform trial. And we developed this expanded access protocol to, or EAP in short, to run in parallel to the platform trial. So this EAP is really the first federally funded large EAP that provides not only access, but also an opportunity to conduct research. And here we went one step further to say, you know, this is an IV infusion medication, and can we show that we can actually run an EAP in a large scale across 25 sites in the US, not just limited to one large center, MGH, or one single large center, but run it across multiple different sites and bring this experimental medication to patients, in many cases, in the comfort of their homes, to do these weekly infusions at homes without having to travel long distances to participate in research. Of course, that is dependent on a site-by-site basis, depending on what the local site is able to do in terms of home infusion or on-site infusions. And then, so that's the access front, right? On the research front, there's also a high level of rigor that was developed. The protocol was developed, and you're following the protocol. Every site follows the same protocol, collects outcomes in the same standardized fashion, and it allows us to collect safety and some biomarker data in a standardized fashion that can be analyzed. So this is really a new era of multi-center EAPs in ALS. And prior to this, there were small EAPs in ALS, and most of those were funded primarily through philanthropic support at a certain center, and the company would give the drug for free. So, but this is a new shift in the paradigm with the Act for ALS funded grants. We can go to the next slide. So the 3 PIs that are leading the expanded access protocol of Trehalose IV infusions, I have the honor of co-leading this with Dr. James Berry, my colleague here at MGH Healy Center, as well as Dr. Sabrina Paganoni, also at MGH. We can go to the next slide. So this study basically is aiming to enroll 70 participants with ALS across 25 different sites. The dosage of Trehalose, the regimen, all of that is very similar to how the regimen E of HEALEY Platform Trial is being conducted. And the infusions, as I said before, may occur at home or at the study center, depending on what that local study site chooses or has capabilities to conduct. So in this expanded access protocol, we have 2 cohorts. One cohort is for participants who are Trehalose naive, meaning that they have not been exposed to Trehalose IV infusions, or they've not been a part of the HEALEY platform trial in the past. And these are patients who are also otherwise not eligible for any other ongoing clinical trial, easily accessible ongoing clinical trial. And that part is actually the definition that comes from the law itself. So this EAP is primarily for patients who don't qualify for traditional trials. And that definition is true for both cohorts. And in cohort 2, we are focusing on collecting long-term safety and efficacy data from participants who have already been a part of regimen E in the HEALEY platform trial, or and then they're rolling over into the EAP after they have participated in the regimen E. So it provides an opportunity to collect long-term data. And we can go to the next slide. So these are the inclusion criteria, and then the next slide will also have the exclusion criteria. We can go to the next slide as well. You can find all of these, the details of inclusion, exclusion criteria on the clinicaltrials.gov website. So I won't go into the details of all of this. Fundamentally, this is a carbohydrate moiety. So anybody who has diabetes or has screening glucose greater than 140 milligrams per deciliter is essentially excluded from the study, because we don't want to make their diabetes worse, and we want to be careful about that. And we can go to the next slide. So what does it look like for cohort 1 versus cohort 2 participants? And now we have different sites actually offering a permutation combination of on-site versus off-site, remote, home infusions. So for essentially for both cohorts, when they enter into the study, they will have to undergo screening procedures and then start the medication. And that's where it becomes slightly different for the two cohorts. If there is a participant who's already been a part of Regimen E and they have received Trehalose, they've tolerated it well, and they don't have any allergic reactions or any side effects from it, then they can actually start receiving the very first infusion in the EAP remotely. So they can start receiving this right from the get-go, from the very first infusion at home, if their local site is able to provide home infusions. On the other hand, if a participant has never received Trehalose previously, either they've been a part of only the double-blind portion of the Regimen E and they've not entered the open label extension, and then they're rolling over directly into the expanded access protocol, or they are in cohort 1 and they've not been a part of the platform trial Regimen E, then they would need to undergo 4 infusions on site, the first 4 weekly infusions on site, just to make sure that there are no unanticipated side effects. And if there are side effects, they're caught early and under supervision of the clinic team or the study team. We can go to the next slide. And so then we start to think about, what does conducting a study like this really look like? It's 70 patients across 25 sites. And I think the ALS community is familiar with running large-scale trials with many patients, but we don't often think about what goes into running a trial like this. What happens on the background scene? And so for a study like this, basically, there are multiple different teams that all have to come together in order to make this work and run like a well-oiled machine. So the team comprises of the multi-PI team from MGH, and then it involves a central IRB that oversees the regulatory oversight of the study across all the different sites that are participating in the expanded access protocol. In addition, we have to liaise with each of the ethics committees or institutional review boards of each of the participating sites, because they may have their own specific additional requirements in addition to what the central IRB requires to run the study. So we have to get blessings from all of them. And then there are a number of vendors that are contributing to the operations, the conduct of this expanded access protocol. And then you have teams at each of the 25 different sites and a large patient community that's participating in the study, not only participating as participants in the study, but also contributing as patient advisors in the design and conduct of the study itself. And then there is NIH, the federal agency that's actually funding the expanded access protocol, and CELOS, the company that is manufacturing the drug and providing the drug for this protocol. So we can go to the next slide. That's a broad overview. Then you look at each of these components and try to understand what goes into each of this. We're all the key stakeholders at MGH. So at MGH, in addition to the 3 multi-PIs, there is a large team that makes this a large effort, a multi-site effort like this possible. We have teams that include project management, data management, systems, grants administration, quality assurance, to make sure that the protocol is conducted in a standardized way across all the 25 different sites. The data is collected in a standardized way, and all the contracts are in place, and all the data is entered into a centralized electronic data capture system in the same way, which later will then be used, downloaded, and then used for analysis of the study data. So this is a large group of people that are working on the background to make this EAP happen at MGH. And then we can go to the next slide. Then you start to look at the vendors. In addition to the MGH group, there are several different vendors that are involved in running this EAP, starting from the central safety lab, where all the blood samples go to, where we look at, how's the patient's liver function, glucose levels, all of these things we monitor over time. Then there's also the central biomarker lab that analyzes some of the biomarkers we're collecting as a part of this EAP to understand, that's the research part, to understand understand, how are some of the biomarkers like neurofilament levels changing when people are taking Trehalose IV infusion over time. And then there's an independent data and safety monitoring committee, and that is independent of CLOS, independent of MGH, and they look at the data that is generated from the EAP to make sure that all participants who are receiving this experimental medication are safe, and there are no adverse signals of safety that are emerging, especially because the EAP is also targeting participants who are otherwise not eligible for clinical trials, and many of them may be further along their ALS journeys or a little bit more advanced, and so we want to make sure that we're not adding any additional risks due to the experimental medication. Then there's a large site monitoring and training group that we closely collaborate with, and this is an important group that actually works with each of the sites to make sure that all study staff members are trained on the outcomes we're collecting, and everybody is doing it in a standardized fashion, and all the data that is collected on paper source documents are all accurate, verified, and made sure that what goes into the electronic data capture system is all consistent across all the different sites. And then there is study drug handling and shipping vendor, home infusion company. These are all nurses, part of a vendor group that who help with weekly infusions. And this is a vendor that is spread across all the different 25 sites that are involved in the study, and biostatisticians will be analyzing the data at the end of the study, as well as the study progresses, and a data standardization and management. So this is sort of that ecosystem of all the vendors that are helping to run this study as well. Then we can go to the next slide. And then you start to look at what happens at a site level. And each of you may be located at different parts of the US, and maybe you are enrolled in a study at a different site other than MGH. And when you go into a site, there is another big ecosystem of different people who are running the show at that particular site. And the captain of that ship is a site investigator at each of the sites. And then there are several people who have very unique roles for not only the EAP, for each individual study that they're running, including study nurses, study coordinators, their grant administrators, their clinicians, and additional site resources as required for each site. So you can go to the next slide. So put together, all this taken together, it creates this massive ecosystem of so many different people. It's not one village, it's like multiple villages all working together to make a multi-site study happen. And it's not about how many patients or how many sites. It's really about even the complexity that goes into that rigor and making sure that the data quality is excellent, and we maintain that scientific rigor in conducting the study as well. And this is true not only for this EAP, this is true for almost all multi-site clinical trials or large EAPs as such that follow a central protocol, a central operations team. So where are we in this EAP so far? So we started the study in Q4 of 2022, and everything is progressing according to what was planned and anticipated. We enrolled our first participant in March of this year, and enrollment has really picked up, and it's been going really well at all the sites. And if all goes well, we will continue to enroll for both cohort 1, cohort 2. And what happens eventually is, in terms of the treatment and follow-up and closeout reporting, is also tied to what happens to the parent trial, the regimen E of the HEALEY platform trial. If that study is positive and is successful, then the EAP continues to run as has been planned. If unfortunately for some reason the parent study becomes negative and the parent study closes down, then we may have to actually wrap up the expanded access protocol as well. So we don't know, and we hope that it will be a successful study, like we hope for every study to be successful in ALS. And so right now there are multiple different sites that have been activated, and there's several different sites that are being onboarded and are in the process of being activated. There are a number of things that go into activating a site, including completion of all the local regulatory requirements, making sure the pharmacy is set up, the infusion center is set up, up. The site agreements are in place, the local as well as the central IRB approvals are in place, and all the regulatory documents are collected and up to date are up to date. You can go to the next slide to give you a snapshot of where the study is being conducted and what the current status is. So currently, as of 25th of July, these are the sites that have been activated and are in startup. And out of the 25 planned sites, 14 sites are already up and running. And there are 2 sites that are very close to activation, could be any day now. And out of the 70 total participants, 25 have been enrolled already. So the enrollment is going as planned. And there is a great deal of interest from patients across all the different sites, despite the fact that this is an infusion and more invasive weekly infusion regimen. So we can go to the next slide. So this is an overview of what the current enrollment is for the expanded access protocol. So cohort 1, as a reminder, enrolls Trehalose naive participants who have not been a part of the platform trial. So we've enrolled about 15 participants in cohort 1 and 10 participants in cohort 2. And these are the participants who have rolled over from regimen E. So it's almost an even split between the 2 cohorts as of now. And we can go to the next slide. I think this is the last slide. So if you have any questions, you want to reach out to any of us, these are the email addresses for you to reach out. With that, I will stop. And I think we have a few questions.
Yes, thank you for that great presentation, Dr. Babu. And there are definitely some questions that came in. I think a lot of people had kind of similar energy with a few of the questions, so I'll combine them, but I'll start with this one here. Someone is wondering, kind of in light of SEALOS and the decision to stop the open label extension portion of the trial due to the expense of that, does the federal government pay for the expanded access for Trehalose?
So the expanded access protocol is, the entire expanded access protocol that I talked about is NIH funded. It's unfortunate that the open label extension had to close, but the open label extension closing is not something that we had anticipated or we knew about ahead of time. And so participants who come off of the open label extension should still meet all the eligibility criteria for the expanded access in order to qualify for the expanded access. So an important eligibility criterion there is that they should still not be eligible for any other ongoing clinical trial in order to be eligible for the EAP. So if there is a participant who's coming off of OLE and still qualifies for the parent HEALEY platform trial, they will not be eligible for the EAP. So it's not a given that all participants who are coming off of the OLE will enter into the EAP.
Thank you. And then to clarify, is the funding for the Trehalose expanded access, is that funding pretty much locked down because it's grant funded?
It is grant funded, yes.
Okay. So yeah, I don't think there's any concern there that the expanded access protocol would run low on funding due to the grant funding there. So there are a lot of questions that came in asking if we know any results or able to share any preliminary data related to Trehalose.
I wish we knew anything about what's going on with the Trehalose data. It is still ongoing, so we don't know. And as soon as the data is the database is locked and analyzed, it will be presented to everybody. So as of now, we have no clue.
I'll say there are questions about the timing for when we might expect the results for regimen E. Dr. Babu, I don't know if you have any input on that.
Yeah, that will be probably a question for Dr. Paganoni and Dr. Sokovich. So currently, all I can share is that the regimen E is close to enrollment. Whoever is in the study are all finishing up their the treatment portion of the study. So once the last participant completes their last visit, then there will be a period where every site's data will be verified, and then the database will be locked, and then the analysis starts. So I don't know the exact time frame for that, but that may be a question we can bring back to Dr. Paganoni and Sokovich.
I agree. I know we were saying in previous weeks that we'll be able to share more details and provide a better estimate of the timeline for those results sometime in the fall. But we do anticipate being able to share more updates on that prior to the end of 2023. But we'll, of course, keep you in the loop through these webinars. Somebody is asking whether the data that's gathered through this expanded access protocol would be able to be used for regulatory approval.
That's a great question. And again, the concept of EAP is evolving from just access to we can conduct research. And this is the very first EAP where we're actually looking at an EAP to collect data and conduct research. And our hope is that the data generated from this EAP would be helpful in contributing to that, the final package when if all goes well and it moves towards the FDA submission. But there'll definitely be, safety signals generated from this EAP that we'll learn as real world evidence that would be very valuable for everybody.
There is a question here about whether there have been any interim or futility checks within the platform trial pertaining to regimen E.
I think that will also be another question for Dr. Paganoni and Sukovich. If there is a futility check and if it has met the futility criteria, the study will not be ongoing. And so that's generally a general rule of thumb there. So we can bring back the question.
Right. Yeah, I agree. There are interim analyses set up that happen periodically throughout the platform trial as regimen E is ongoing, as with every other regimen. But we're not privy to the information. So it's a separate entity, the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, that they're able to look at the data just, to kind of be the whistleblowers if we needed to stop the trial for any reason. So like Dr. Babu was saying, the fact that the trial is still ongoing means that we're, anticipating the results of the study being the information that tells us next steps. There are some questions here kind of related more on the science side of trehalose itself. So somebody's asking, do you infuse pure trehalose in water, or does the infusion solution contain other components such as antioxidants?
Oh, that's a great question. I have to go back and look at what the infusion actually contains. Yeah, I don't want to misspeak, but we can get back to you with that information.
Yeah, we can connect offline. I'll put my email in the chat for anyone who has questions afterwards. Another question from that same person is whether we've observed any side effect grade 3 or higher in any participant or any onset of hypersensitivity to trehalose during therapy.
So again, the data is not analyzed from regimen E or from the EAP at the moment. And the fact that the study is ongoing, inherently tells us that there is no emerging safety signal that would prompt the study to, pause or halt because there are emerging safety concerns from the study. But I don't know if I know the specifics of what severity or what grade anybody's experiencing.
Somebody is asking, there's someone who's participating in regimen F, and they're wondering if the findings of regimen E and regimen F are both good, would there be a study on people taking both of those?
Oh, that's another really interesting question. So this is, both regimens E and F, or any regimen in the platform trial, is a phase 2 trial. So typically FDA requires 2 positive trials, for future approval. And if both are successful down the road, will there be, a study where you're combining both? Or if both are successful and they get approved, then potentially they both could become standard of care. And then the question arises, what's a good combination of standard of care medications on top of the current approved standard of care medications? And are there any interactions between the 2 medications or not?
Yeah, I think that's always a great question when we get that. And we've seen it already where, even now the different combinations, anything that's FDA approved, people can take while they're participating in the platform trial. So there already are, tests of combinations of different therapies. So it really does just depend on the science and if there's good rationale and approval to do that. But, one of the things we always say is that the platform trial is built to be adaptable. So yeah, I think ideas like that are always flowing in the scientific community as well. Somebody is wondering if expanded access is only applicable to ALS, and wondering if for ALS, is it funded specifically through the NIH?
If I understand this question correctly, is the question, are EAPs only for ALS and are all EAPs funded through NIH? Is that what the question is, Catherine?
I would say so. If it needs to be clarified more, but that's what I would take from it.
Yeah, so EAPs, as I mentioned earlier as well, expanded access protocols are new to ALS, but they're not new to the field of medicine. So oncology and other fields have been running EAPs for a long, long time now. And not all EAPs are funded by the NIH. Some of them have grant funding, and the source of funding could be a variety of different sources, including NIH. It could be foundations, it could be philanthropy, and in some cases, there may not be any funding at all for an EAP, where the company might provide the drug and all the other expenses may actually be billed even to the patient's insurance. If you look at the FDA's definition of EAP, they actually, it's quite broad and vague, and in some by the pure definition of EAP, FDA's website will say that in some cases, potentially even the cost of manufacturing the drug or conducting the EAP could be recovered as well. So it's broad, it's vague, and it comes in various forms and various formats across different disease conditions.
Kind of a related question here. Are there any other drugs that are currently conducting expanded access protocols? Where can people find more information about that? And then furthermore, are there any citizenship requirements for participating in expanded access protocols?
Yeah, so every EAP is different. I can answer the citizenship question first. Every EAP is different. Many of the EAPs will say, for example, if you take Trehalose as an example, the protocol requires weekly infusion. And if you're not living in the US, it becomes difficult to travel to get those infusions on a weekly basis, because even the home infusion companies may actually be are within the US as such. If you want to get information about the EAP, ct.gov is a good place to find information about EAPs. The HEALEY Central website has some information about EAPs as well. And this is a growing, evolving field. So keep looking at some of these sites and resources, and the numbers will continue to grow. Outside of US, there are some expanded access protocols that are being conducted, and one of them that is still active is for the tofersen intrathecal therapy, which has been approved in the US, but it's still experimental in many other countries. So if you are joining this call from a different country and if you have the SOD1 mutation, you might want to look into whether tofersen EAP is available close to where you are.
Great. And with that, I think that was the last question that we got. And I see that we're at 5:36 here, East Coast time. So Dr. Babu, I'll hand it to you if you want to add any last comments for the evening.
Thank you so much for joining this webinar. And I enjoyed presenting to this group, and I really enjoyed all the questions that came through the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week.